Now, what's not addressed in the FEMA director's statement is why she thinks this kind of behavior is confined to one FEMA employee. She's trying to play this off as an isolated incident when it clearly isn't one. Again, this official gave these instructions multiple times, verbally and in writing. And the fact that she would say this, much less put it in writing, tells us quite a bit about the culture at the agency. Because it seems to me that if helping people, regardless of their political affiliation, really were the core values and principles of FEMA, this supervisor would not have felt comfortable giving those kinds of instructions.
Hello, everybody, and how are you doing today? Today we have Matt Walsh and FEMA's horrible treatment of Trump supporters during a natural disaster. It is absolutely and utterly horrific what has happened, and basically this is Matt's take on the entire thing. So let's go down and have a listen. And if you do like this and some of my other content, please hit the subscribe button. It really does help me with the algorithm, and it will help me get the word out so we can all fight the left and the woke mind virus. Let's go.
Oh, disinformation. Of course, a month before the presidential election, actual luxury this Christmas season. That's cozyearth.com/Matt Walsh and use code Matt Walsh for 40% off. And when you get the post-purchase survey, make sure to let them know you heard about it on the Matt Walsh Show. A month before the presidential election, the people running FEMA decided to venture outside the field of disaster relief and into the completely unrelated, if very trendy, business of policing, quote-unquote, disinformation. And of course, policing disinformation isn't what FEMA is paid to do. It's not why FEMA receives tens of billions of dollars every year from taxpayers. But in this case, the agency determined that it had no other choice. Disinformation, in the eyes of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, had become its own kind of emergency. It was a disaster unto itself. Now, to that end, FEMA's director, a woman named Deanne Criswell, who incidentally broke the glass ceiling to become the first woman to head the agency, announced that FEMA would be conducting a thorough investigation to, quote, uncover the source of conspiracy theories hampering Hurricane Helene relief efforts. Now, among those conspiracy theories were that FEMA was directing funding to illegal immigrants and that FEMA was withholding assistance to certain demographic groups. As Criswell put it, quote, it's really unfortunate that we try to create this level of fear that is impeding our ability to do our job at the level we need to do it. Now, even if these were baseless conspiracy theories, it was never explained how they could be hampering hurricane relief efforts. I mean, how would kooky internet theories prevent you from helping people whose houses were washed away in a flood exactly? She never bothered to explain that. But more importantly, it turns out that the theories, of course, were true. Almost immediately, it became very clear that FEMA was indeed overseeing the distribution of hundreds of millions of dollars to house illegal aliens. That was kind of difficult to deny since there was a paper trail. So that's one conspiracy theory that was proven true right off the bat, as so many others have been. But the media in this country and all over the world continue to maintain that, contrary to what Donald Trump and those deranged MAGA Republicans were saying, no disaster relief was being withheld based on demographics or political views. And they were very, very clear on that point. Watch.
Even with all eyes now on Milton, it's the fallout from Helene that suddenly caught up in the ever more ugly U.S. presidential election.
Kamala Harris has left them stranded. This is the worst response to a storm or a catastrophe or a hurricane that we've ever seen, ever.
On that, Donald Trump supporters cheered, but fact checkers had a field day, labeling Trump's claims Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have failed to properly aid those hit hard by Helene as demonstrably false.
This is un-American.
Biden, in turn, slamming Trump for politicizing Helene's damage and harming Americans in need.
But it misleads people. It puts people in circumstances where they panic.
Donald Trump has repeatedly stated falsehoods about the federal response to hurricane relief efforts, and officials say that's creating fear and it's also demoralizing aid workers. In the aftermath of Helene, Trump claimed without evidence that the federal government was intentionally withholding aid to people living in Republican areas.
So this is the moralizing tone that we're all very familiar with at this point. The media wags its fingers at Donald Trump for saying something supposedly without evidence. They cited the vaunted fact checkers who have already looked into the situation, and then they imply that you're a moron if you come to the conclusion that FEMA would ever, in its wildest dreams, shortchange American citizens who urgently need emergency assistance. We're supposed to believe that FEMA would never do such a thing, unless the year is 2005 and a Republican's in the White House, in which case FEMA desperately wants to kill as many black people as possible. Other than that, FEMA is the gold standard. Any suggestion to the contrary is simply misinformation. To give one more example, The Atlantic dismissed the, quote, rumors alleging that FEMA was abandoning Trump voters after Helene. These claims, we were told, were misinformation. Now, when the media was making these claims about FEMA, it's true that there wasn't a written document from FEMA that explicitly stated, don't help Trump supporters. But there was still a lot of evidence to back up what Trump was saying. For one thing, there were many reports from residents in North Carolina and Florida that FEMA wasn't helping them, as I covered on the show at the time. Then Congressman Corey Mills reported that the federal government was preventing civilian rescue pilots and aid workers from saving lives in the aftermath of Helene in order to supposedly clear airspace for Air Force One. And then a SpaceX engineer who was assisting rescue efforts on the ground in North Carolina stated that, quote, FEMA is actively blocking shipments and seizing goods and services locally and locking them away. It's very real and scary how much they have taken control to stop people helping. We are blocked now on the shipments of new Starlinks coming in until we get an escort from the fire department, but that may not be enough. Now, after these reports came out, the media and the federal government obviously should have begun a full investigation about what exactly FEMA was doing. If they actually cared about the lives of Republicans living in disaster areas, they wouldn't sit back and lecture us about misinformation and claim that we're, saying things without evidence. They'd acknowledge that there is a lot of very concerning evidence, and they would look into the details, but they didn't do that. Instead, they scolded us for thinking that FEMA would even consider the possibility of withholding assistance from Trump voters who had just been hit by a hurricane. So it fell to the Daily Wire to break the story on Friday that, in fact, FEMA had systematically refused to provide disaster relief to Trump voters in the aftermath of Helene, and had done so explicitly because they're Trump voters.
Now, look, I have had my problems with the Daily Mail. I think we all have. But the thing is that it's great to have alternative media out there, and you don't have to agree with anyone 100%, okay? Don't ever dismiss any type of information, even if it's coming from the loony left, because they all have to have some type of reality in there. There has to be something in there that's real. Remember, any good lie is 90% true, okay? All you have to do is sift through the crap, and then you'll find the truth, but you have to take it from a lot of different sources. And it's great to have a lot of different sources, and that is why the left is doing their very best to try to shut down voices on the net.
And not just that, a FEMA official had put the plan in writing as clearly and as unambiguously as possible. I mean, this is behavior that's so obscene and so malicious that even given everything we know about the Biden-Harris administration, a lot of people still assumed it couldn't possibly be real. But it is real. And if you or someone you know needs a wake-up call about how far Democrats and the federal government will go in order to punish Americans who don't agree with them, well, here it is.
Honestly, I mean, let's say a political appointee of a preferred class basically uses that agency to punish their political opponents. I mean, if you think real hard about it, it sounds somewhat like a political movement back in 1930s Europe, doesn't it?
This is that moment. As the Daily Wire's Leaflet Mayhew reported, quote, a FEMA supervisor told workers in a message to avoid homes advertising Trump as they canvassed Lake Placid, Florida to identify residents who could qualify for federal aid, internal messages viewed by the Daily Wire reveal. The supervisor, Marnie Washington, relayed this message both verbally and in a group chat used by the relief team, multiple government employees told the Daily Wire. Now, here's a screenshot of one of the written messages. It reads, quote, implement best practices. No one goes anywhere alone. Avoid homes advertising Trump. Practice de-escalation and preventative measures. Bring a towel with you in the field. Frequent breaks and drink water. Avoid high-salt diets and coffee. So the instructions to avoid homes with Trump signs is just kind of casually thrown in there along with basic tips for people who are conducting relief operations in a disaster zone. It wasn't some special secretive directive. It apparently felt completely natural to a FEMA supervisor to put something like this in writing just casually in a list along with other tips. And to be clear, this wasn't some extremely dumb joke or a prank or something. This is not Photoshop or whatever. It's not any of that. It's 100% confirmed. The Daily Wire's reporting continues. The government employees told the Daily Wire that at least 20 homes with Trump signs or flags were skipped from the end of October and into November due to the guidance, meaning they were not given the opportunity to qualify for FEMA assistance. Images shared with the Daily Wire show that houses were skipped over by the workers who wrote in the government system messages such as, Trump sign, no entry per leadership. Yes, that's actually what the FEMA employees wrote in the notes section when they were documenting what was happening. And this is what that looked like in the government systems. You can see it there. So it says, not able to access property, implying that the house was physically inaccessible. And then the note clarifies that actually they were able to access the property, they just didn't want to. And yes, that's something that a government employee put in writing in a fully traceable and internally accessible database, which is like a bank robber passing a note to the teller saying, put all the money in the bag, and by the way, here's my home address, my license plate, and my legal name. Within hours of the Daily Wire's reporting, this FEMA supervisor was fired, and this time around, FEMA's director wasn't wagging her finger at right-wing disinformation. She didn't tell us how unfortunate it was that we were spreading fear. Instead, this time she claimed that the supervisor's behavior was extremely unusual, unthinkable at FEMA. Quote, recently one FEMA employee departed from these values to advise her survivor assistance team to not go to homes with yard signs supporting President-elect Trump. This is a clear violation of FEMA's core values and principles to help people regardless of their political affiliation. This was reprehensible. I want to be clear to all of my employees and the American people. This type of behavior and action will not be tolerated at FEMA. We will hold people accountable if they violate these standards of conduct. This employee has been terminated, and we have referred the matter to the Office of Special Counsel. I will continue to do everything I can to make sure this never happens again. Now, what's not addressed in the FEMA director's statement is why she thinks this kind of behavior is confined to one FEMA employee. She's trying to play this off as an isolated incident when it clearly isn't one. Again, this official gave these instructions multiple times, verbally and in writing. And the fact that she would say this, much less put it in writing, tells us quite a bit about the culture at the agency. Because it seems to me that if helping people, regardless of their political affiliation, really were the core values and principles of FEMA, this supervisor would not have felt comfortable giving those kinds of instructions. This is the kind of thing that only happens when the entire agency is corrupted. Think about what happened ahead of Trump's election in 2016. There were multiple high-ranking FBI officials texting each other on company phones about how they'd try to prevent Trump from becoming president. In August 2016, an FBI lawyer texted the head of the agency's counterintelligence division, who incidentally was her lover at the time, quote, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? And he replied, no, he won't. We'll stop it. And then they talked about an insurance policy in case Trump was elected. Again, the FBI's top expert in counterintelligence was using an FBI-issued phone to say stuff like this. That's the kind of thing that only happens when you're very confident the FBI wouldn't care if they found out what you're saying because they agree with you. It wasn't one or two bad eggs at the FBI. The whole agency was compromised. Now, there's every reason to think that the same principle applies to FEMA. At the highest levels, FEMA went on the warpath against right-wing disinformation just a month ago. And just a few weeks later, all of that alleged disinformation has turned out to be true. So how about we just stop insulting everyone's intelligence and admit what everybody knows, which is that FEMA, like pretty much every other federal agency, probably voted for Kamala Harris by a 9-1 margin. And like every other government agency that's overrun with left-wing activists, it's not simply incompetent. It's an active danger to the well-being of half the country. This is why Elon Musk's plan to gut the federal bureaucracy isn't just about cost savings. It's about stopping these lunatics before they get more people killed. It's also about hiring people who aren't crazy and unstable. The New York Post did some digging on this FEMA supervisor's social media feeds, and here's what they found. Quote, the former FEMA employee has a strong fixation with the history of slavery. She posted on her Facebook page in 2019 about supposedly the first slave ship to travel to the America in the 1500s, as well as an article about how California tried to ban free black individuals in the mid-1800s. I'm steadfast and extremely unpredictable, she wrote on her social media page, adding a kiss emoji. So she's, that's what you want from someone who's running a disaster relief. That's what you want from a government, a bureaucrat running disaster relief, if they describe themselves as extremely unpredictable. Yeah, that's a quality you're looking. But no, she's not just extremely, she's steadfast and extremely unpredictable, which seems to me to be like a contradiction in terms. And she's also obsessed with slavery, apparently to the point where she wanted some payback against all those MAGA Republicans. Maybe that was her motivation, who knows? And just on this basis alone, there's no universe in which somebody like this should be employed at taxpayer expense. We simply can't continue hiring barely literate left-wing activists anymore. Maybe it's time to take background checks and interviews a little more seriously in order to make sure that we never hire one of these morons again, especially when they're using kiss emojis on Facebook, which is independently disqualifying. Now, in the meantime, for starters, FEMA's director needs to go. And I would hope that'd be one of the first things to happen when Trump takes office. And this employee should not just be fired, but prosecuted. Now, you can't lock up pro-lifers for praying and then look the other way when a government official refuses to assist storm victims because they support Trump. And then we need a full accounting for all the other ways that FEMA and other government agencies sabotage the interests of American citizens under the Biden-Harris administration. If they're willing to basically write, "We won't help Trump supporters," I mean, not basically write that, but that's what they wrote, and put that in a government database, you could just imagine what a thorough investigation would probably uncover. At this point, it wouldn't be unthinkable to discover the FBI was, writing notes about how they have to arrest as many pro-lifers as possible as revenge for Roe being overturned. Or the Department of Education is telling teachers to make students dumb and illiterate so that one day they might seriously consider voting for a candidate like Kamala Harris. I mean, nothing's off the table, given what we've seen so far. The federal bureaucracy is at war with the citizens who pay their salaries. And a lot of well-intentioned Americans have dutifully paid those salaries over the years on the assumption that these bureaucrats were public servants that they could count on when necessary. But if that was ever true, it's not true anymore. Overwhelmingly, federal bureaucrats are servants of the Democrat Party, which demands unwavering loyalty, and as we have seen, tolerates no dissent. They're willing to call you liars for pointing out what they know they're doing. They're willing to go into storm-ravaged neighborhoods and tell Trump supporters that they're on their own. And that's why when the next administration starts, all of these bureaucrats will be on their own. Americans aren't going to rush to their defense when the cuts begin. When these bureaucrats go to court to save their jobs in the inevitable wave of lawsuits, nobody's going to support them. There will be broad support for eliminating civil service protections. Everyone understands that a bureaucracy that doesn't serve its citizens and that goes out of its way to harm its citizens has no reason to exist. Actually, there's at least one exception to that generalization. The corporate press believes that the job of the government is to punish its own citizens for wrong things. So they're doing everything they can to resist the destruction of the deep state. And that's now very clear as well. Last night, a reporter for NBC News had a complete meltdown over the Daily Wire's reporting. And this reporter, a woman named Myrna Al-Sarif, wrote a story about the Daily Wire's coverage that failed to name the FEMA employee in question, and also implied that we don't know when and where this incident occurred. But we do have all those details. They're mentioned in the Daily Wire story. Of course, the reporter, who has pronouns in her bio, of course, doesn't mention the Daily Wire in her piece, nor does she cite us. But she's clearly read the reporting because we're the ones who broke the story in the first place. And then when the Daily Wire's editor, Brent Scher, pointed out all of these problems to Myrna, she went on a bizarre tirade lashing out at everybody who interacted with her. For example, and this is, again, a reporter for NBC, she wrote, quote, "Sorry, Brent Scher, are your feelings hurt because I didn't link to the Daily Wire story? Stay mad." Then when someone pointed out that she was acting like a hack, Myrna wrote, quote, "The hack is your mama." She went on to call somebody the B word and then declared, "I get my info from official sources." In other words, she's not going to look at the screenshots from FEMA's database because they weren't included in the FEMA press release. Therefore, she won't mention them. And then after a bunch of people pointed out that she was acting completely unhinged, she called Brent Scher a troll and then deleted her X account entirely. Now, you can choose to interpret all this as the late-night psychotic breakdown of a potentially intoxicated NBC News journalist. But the truth is, NBC News, like FEMA, goes out of its way to hire people like this. They want people who are dishonest, unintelligent, unhinged, unstable. They're willing to tolerate all of those characteristics as long as these people also hate Republicans with a passion. That is the one quality they screen for at NBC News, and it's the one quality they screen for in the federal government. Up until now. Put another way, the federal bureaucracy is a leviathan that has expanded to the point that it has no shame, no self-awareness, no competence, no integrity. It has only a deep and abiding disdain for tens of millions of Americans. Disdain that's so pervasive that they're happy to put it in writing. They have become emboldened, in part because they have the support of the news media. But that's the only support they have at this point. It's become too obvious to far too many people that they want to destroy us for what we believe. And now I think it's time to return the favor.
And there you have it, folks. That is Matt Walsh's take on the new thing that's coming down with FEMA right now. This is horrific in so many different ways. But honestly, it is the way that the left works. And you'll notice that they have basically that their friends in the mass media is also there to help them along and to lie for them and to support them and all the endeavors that they have to quash their political enemies and keep power where they want it. And that is, of course, the deep state. So thank you all very much for joining me today. Please comment on everything you've heard. Tell me what you think about this. This is bad. And that's just basically all I can really put it down to without, really blowing out blowing out YouTube and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling right now. Thank you all very much. Again, comment, like, please subscribe. Thank you all very much. Later.